Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. He cast the card Pick Your Poison, and he chose the poison for Cusco, Cusco's poison. It's Matt Morgan.
Joey, did you hear about the author? He wrote a novel based off prisoners that he met while he was in jail.
No, I did not.
Yeah, it had a lot of pros and cons, but overall,
Oh my...
I'm glad you got that. I thought this was going to be more of a slow burn, but that one hit you right in the feels.
I know I've said this a couple of times lately, but new favorite dad joke from you, Matt. That was absolutely just truly terrific, and it speaks right to my heart as an English major.
I know this is a good start to the year. We're just on fire with these jokes. I know Dana's not here to really throw the 1-2 punch, but we still got a jab on you.
I see what you're doing. At first, I thought that you were going to make a joke about the new card Crime Novelist or something like that, but I much prefer where you wound up going with it instead.
Well, thank you. I mean, still technically is kind of a crime novelist because it was written from jail, had to do the crime. Anyways.
Okay, we're losing the thread on that one. Yeah.
We are.
the pros of the pros. All right, yeah. So yes, Matt, it is the two of us for this week. What is the topic that we are tackling?
Well, we figured we would do a little would you rather. So there's all sorts of different things that we on the show kind of talk about, like, oh, we don't like it when people do this. And so why don't we just take some of those things that we say we don't really enjoy and compare them to find out which one really is the worst of the worst.
Yeah, I kind of like this because it's sort of a sneaky way for us to compliment some stuff we said we don't necessarily like. But also, I think that by investigating them, we do actually get to see what are the things that push our buttons and what are the things that we can icially find creative solutions around rather than just feeling a little bit downtrodden by them. And so we're hoping that this is kind of a fun approach to some of these spicier or sometimes even saltier topics. So I'm excited to get into it with you. Real quick though, before we get into this topic, we've got to give a couple of quick shout outs. First, we got to thank Chase, aka Mana Curves, for their terrific work on the post-production of the show. It's so much fun working with you, Chase. Thank you so much, Mana Curves.
Well, and as a reminder too, folks, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. They are just out there making the best accessories for your deck boxes. You need the best sleeves, whatever it is to protect your Magic cards. Ultimate Guard really does the best job at guarding your ultimate treasures.
Okay, Matthew, that's maybe a dad joke too far, but I agree with you. Their sleeves shuffle like butter, and those deck boxes, those are just what I use. Those are just I love the boulders so freaking much, and they're compact and perfect. And you can carry a lot more of them around that way. Both the sleeves and the deck boxes are a perfect way to keep your cards safe and protect the cards that you love to play.
And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by liking the video on YouTube, subscribing on YouTube, subscribing on your local podcast app, leaving a review, just all great ways that just is definitely appreciated. And if you are so moved, you can also support the show by going to patreon.com/EDHRECast, where we have patron tiers of all sorts of levels, whether you want to join our Discord community, you want to see all of our historic challenges stats picks, you want the weekly patron shout out, there's all of that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including, like I said, that patron shout out. And this week, that coveted shout out we're going to give to Henry Jackson, who is the lesser known brother of Percy Jackson, who's oftentimes out there fighting the Titans, I hear. I've never actually seen the movie or the show, but Henry, that doesn't mean we don't appreciate your support.
Matt, I'm going to live with you. It's a good thing that you did not see the Percy Jackson movies.
Okay.
And I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's probably a good thing. I don't know about the new show though. But yeah, Henry Jackson, thank you ever so much for the support. Absolutely true.
Yeah, Henry. Sorry your brother sucks, but you're pretty cool.
Sorry the brother's movie sucks. The Percy Jackson movie. Okay, let's get into our topic here now. We're doing a little Commander Would You Rather, comparing and contrasting a couple of hot button sort of things and seeing which one we'd rather encounter in a commander game or which one we'd rather face more regularly, and different things about commander design from Wizards of the Coast as well, which is actually going to lead me into our first one here. And Matt, I loved the way that when you saw the show notes that we'd whipped up, you were just like, oh, you're starting strong.
Yeah, I thought we would ease into this topic maybe.
No,
you came out swinging, and so I was like, all right then.
Yeah, so here's our first Would You Rather. Would you rather that Wizards of the Coast make more treasure-producing cards, or that they use more Ward on the cards? We've been seeing a lot of Ward 2 lately on cards, such as Roaming Throne and such. And of course, it got a lot of treasures on like the professional face breakers and things of the world. So these are both some things we've seen a lot in design lately. Which would you rather we got more of in a world where we had to get more of one of them?
So this really is such a hard question to lead off of. And so there's two big schools of thought that I could see people coming from, where treasures, it's hard to track. It clutters up the battlefield. It's in a format about accumulating resources. This is just tacking on resources to what you're already doing, and it just kind of speeds everything up in a way that doesn't really need to be done, versus Ward, which it just makes everything hard to interact with. It means that sometimes problematic cards get to cause even more problems they would have otherwise if they didn't have Ward. And so really just comes down to which of those problems do you think is more egregious? And I think I have my answer, Joey, but what do you think?
It's funny. Having whipped these show notes together, you'd think that I would have prepared a little bit more to have an answer, but I'm kind of with you that I'm just like, this one, no. And then like 30 seconds later, I changed my mind. Ultimately, I don't think the format is better if we have more dockside extortionists running around. Like, that is one of the number one cards, if not the number one card, that people bandy about as a thing that could be potentially banned in the Commander format. It's on the tip of everyone's tongues in those discussions. And I understand why, because when you are getting around mana costs, which is one of the fundamental pillars of this game that helps keep things balanced, that's pretty egregious. But I think overall, I'd rather that we have more cards that make treasures than we keep seeing more designs that have Ward tacked onto them, because I think Ward has gotten a little too flippant in its design, dare I say. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of cards that are getting Ward where I'm just like, that's just functionally hexproof. I know it's not functionally hexproof, but it is functionally hexproof with the way it affects a certain type of play pattern. And I think that the solutions that exist available to us that could stop treasures are like the solutions to stop treasures are a little bit more likely than the solutions that could stop Ward, I guess. So like, I'm veering on the side of, if I had to pick a world where we got a whole lot more of one of them, it's likely treasures, because again, as you said, Ward is getting harder and harder to interact with as they keep putting it on stuff.
Well, and it's not just that like we complain like, Ward 2, it's everywhere, because it very much is. But also like it's getting put on more and more problematic things. Like, I understand the desire to create something like Ward 2, where it's not just straight up hexproof, which is completely unfun to interact with, because really you can't. But then they're putting it on cards like Ovika Enigma Goliath, where it's Ward 3 and pay 3 life, which is sometimes hard to do. Or it gets even more difficult, like you said, Joey, where Saruman of Many Colors has Ward, discard an enchantment, instant, or sorcery card. That means you effectively have to have 2 removal spells in your hand. It's not just a Ward pay 2 mana. And that's what's really getting out of hand, because, again, it's not actually hexproof, but it's effectively hexproof. A Sauron the Dark Lord to sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. That means that you're cutting into so much that's already going on. I think Ward has gotten carried away in a certain direction that I don't think it's benefiting the game anymore. Plus, the commanders they're putting Ward on, like the new Voya, Jaws of the Conclave.
Yes.
Why does that have Ward 3?
I don't know. What is going on?
So I think a couple months ago I might have said treasures, because treasures were a little more recent in my brain. But now that we're just getting a critical mass of Ward creatures and Ward on problematic commanders, I think Ward is going to be the one that I am okay with putting to the wayside for a little bit.
I guess my thing is that, as you were hinting at there, it feels like Ward is just being applied too liberally. It feels like Wizards has gone, well, it's not hexproof. You can interact with Ward more, so they're using a heavier hand when they're applying it to things. Mm-hmm. And I wish it had been a little more reserved, because the consequences of Ward can be really rough on the gameplay experience. Like, to compare, like, the consequences of more treasures usually result in like faster games, but there are still available design options to to explore to try and stymie treasures. More like Manglehorn stuff, more artifact punishing cards, more things that trigger when your opponent sacrifice stuff. Mayhem Devil, I think, would be an example there. So then those are things that cause treasures to become a risk for your opponents. Those options still exist to explore in design spaces. Whereas the consequences of Ward are that the games become less interactive, which no one wants, and the solutions of design to try and stop a whole bunch of Ward would have to be like creating more uncounterable pinpoint removal spells. And I think that's dangerous because responding to one form of thing that's difficult to interact with by creating another thing that's difficult to interact with, that strikes me as just a very dangerous spiral. Or another thing is that Ward would just incentivize you to kind of forego pinpoint removal during gameplay and just play more board wipes, because the board wipes will literally be cheaper for you to cast. So that's tough because a heavy board wipe game can be a slog. I can at least say, as you know, another way of responding to Ward, and we said this the other week, that so much extra Ward does at least encourage me to look at other forms of removal, Council's Judgment, Soul Shatter, things that can remove but don't explicitly target, and those can be interesting solutions. But overall, I think that the general consequences overall, a world with more Ward strikes me as one with less exciting gameplay than a world with even more treasures.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be very different if Ward was being kind of loosely used, or it was put less on creatures that have to be answered instantly.
Right.
That's where it gets really frustrating, because there are certain creatures that you have to respond to pretty much when they hit the battlefield, or they're just going to take over and win the game. And so giving additional protection to those must answer type of commanders and those must answer type of creatures, that's where it's just like, we have to answer it, but we actually don't get the ability to do that.
Yeah. It's just, I don't like stuff that discourages us from playing pinpoint removal. That's kind of ultimately where I fall.
Yeah.
But I understand they're both very dangerous, and they're both things that I'm hoping that we actually do see them drawn back a little bit. But it's fun to see, if you had to deal with a whole lot more of one of them, where would it go? And I don't want a whole lot more of the stuff that makes interaction a little bit tougher in a game where we already want people to be playing a lot more interaction sometimes than they do. So that's I think where I fall, and it sounds like you've fallen on the same page.
Yeah, 100%. So next question then, since we've already resolved the first one,
okay.
What would you rather do? Would you rather have wizards make more cards with Eminence, as in abilities that are going to happen while the legendary creature is in the command zone, or more cheating of the commander tax in the same way that we have Yuriko and Derevi able to circumvent commander tax in certain ways?
Oh boy. So lots of playing around with the command zone stuff.
Lots of playing around, yes.
I have a solid answer to this.
Okay.
But I don't think my answer will be the same as yours. I have mentioned before that I actually, I mentioned on an episode that I think that Eminence got a pretty bad rap from some cards like Edgar Markov, which is crazy powerful with how efficient that Eminence ability is. But I don't feel it's quite so bad on cards like Arabo, for instance, where I'm like, the Eminence here is actually kind of light. I think it kind of is neat. And then later, after we made that episode, we saw the new Sidar Jabari card come out, which I think is actually really well tempered with its Eminence ability. So I could see a world where more Eminence happens and it feels more on the Sidar Jabari and Arabo side of things. Whereas cheating commander tax, I don't know of a fair Derevi or Yuriko deck is kind of how I'm going to say it. So that's where I'm coming at this one from.
No, I do agree. So there are levers that can be tweaked around with Eminence. And I think that they've done a good job at showing, okay, if we revisit Eminence like they did with Sidar Jabari, for example, they're going to take lessons. They're going to make sure it's not so well pronounced as they were on some of the egregious cards. Whereas cheating mana cost has never been a productive, at least in my mind, a productive conversation in the WotC design offices, because that's how, instead of Cascade, we get Discover, which is still equally, it's still broken. It's still a nutty mechanic. And so sometimes just when it comes to cheating costs, I think, are games made better by a new way to cheat mana costs? I don't think so. Whereas there's more levers with an interaction that are going on. And I know we just complained about saying Ward removes interaction, but we can, instead of, Ward sacrifice a legendary creature, Ward 1, those are very, very different levers. And I think I would rather have the type of Eminence abilities that the new Sidar Jabari has versus, heck, even the Ur-Dragon seems just super powerful sitting in the command zone, reducing all the costs. Like that's a very powerful type of ability too. So if there were enough levers tweaked, I would rather Eminence come back more often than flat out cheating mana costs. So I do agree. So yeah, you're kind of surprised here, Joey. I know.
I fully thought that, like, just because Eminence is one of those things that people are like, no, this should not have happened. And I think to a degree, I probably agree that, like,
yeah,
if we could have, like, veered the design direction away from that, maybe it would have been better for the game. But I'm still just like, I looked at Derevi and I'm just like, I don't want them to explore this type of design space kind of ever. A commander that is always on the field and that it feels like there's no point in even trying to remove it feels like a very different creature to me than Eminence, where, like,
yeah, sure.
I guess for me, Eminence, the thing that I like about Eminence is that it does encourage a deck building restriction, and I just ultimately I like mechanics or cards that encourage you to have, like, the limitations that you're putting on yourself are in the deck building stage, not just in the way that you are playing the deck stage.
Sure.
That's why it's such a shame that Companion didn't work out the way that Wizards wanted to.
Well, and sadly, I think that we have to learn those bad lessons before we can see the good lessons pay off.
Yeah.
And I think if we would have had maybe a Sidar Jabari first, and Allura was fine.
Right.
I don't think it's near as egregious looking back as it maybe kind of felt when we were playing with cards like Allura. But yeah, if we had a few cards and then we got, maybe if Edgar Markov were printed in 2024, first we'd be like, oh, that's super pushed, but I get it, instead of what the heck were they thinking, this needs to go away.
Yeah.
Again, they tried to kind of put Commander into 60 card formats. It didn't work in giving a sub command zone, but I think if they would have tried it again, it's kind of like what we keep seeing with Partner. Every time we see a revisit to a Partner style mechanic, whether it's Partner with or backgrounds, they keep doing it better. And so I think if we ever do see a Companion style type of mechanic, or we see Companion again, I do believe they are going to do it better than they did last time.
Sure. I think that's fair. And yeah, that is, I guess, like what I was trying to say that ultimately disappointed me about Companions is that, like, I like the idea of this encourages a deck building restriction. It just was not done well, as we all know.
Yeah.
And I think that's also probably fair to say about some of the Eminence designs, but I don't think that is inherently true of all Eminence designs. Whereas, like, stuff that's cheating around commander tax, I guess I'm trying to think, like, if I was in a game of all Eminence commanders versus a game of all Yuriko or Derevi style commanders that cheat around their commander tax, which one of those would feel like a worse experience to me? And I'm not really sure I know the answer to that question, but, like, I certainly did play with the 2017 precons that introduced Eminence, and I don't remember feeling too bothered by that. Whereas just, like, get rid of a Derevi, here's Derevi again, does feel a little bit more like to me.
Yeah,
that's the technical term, is that I think that's probably where I still end up falling.
That's fair, and I think this one still comes down to personal preference way more than the other one. But I don't know, I see more people probably saying that cheating commander tax is something that they're okay with versus Eminence, just because, like, it was pretty hard felt when we did have Eminence, and just how ahead of its time I think the Eminence commanders were. Maybe that's kind of where I'm thinking. I've processed them a little bit more than people who are just seeing them for the first time.
Sure, yeah. But it is an interesting conversation between these commanders that you never need to see on the battlefield versus these commanders that never go away from the battlefield for long.
That's true.
And I guess, like, also as, like, a final button on that is that, like, a commander that's always on the battlefield, like a Yuriko, like, you're getting a full burst of its effect at those times, whereas the Eminence, when it's not on the battlefield, you aren't getting the full burst of what that commander is truly capable of. So maybe that's why I also end up feeling this way too.
Fair.
But very interesting discussion, and I liked this Would You Rather. And I am surprised, again, that we both fell on the same one. I bet a lot of our listeners will feel the opposite way about this one, which is, again, totally fair. Like, because there are ways to pin some of those cheaty commanders, like with a Darksteel mutation, pin them to the field. And that maybe feels a little bit more fun and a bit better to folks out there. So totally understand that argument, but this is ultimately where I fall, of just, like, one of these I could see better explorations in the future of, and the other one I'm just like, please don't.
All right, well, so Joey, let's disagree on this one.
Okay.
I think we might agree, but I'm not sure. Maybe we'll finally diverge. Okay. So would you rather play against combo decks or play against infect and other poison style mechanics?
Yeah, I like this question because, end of the day, I think a lot of people have a lot of big reactions to both of those different things, like a game that ends in an infinite combo, or a game that ends with, like, a Triumph of the Hordes. I don't necessarily feel as strongly as I think a lot of folks out there do. Like, I'm sometimes games have to end, but I understand the nature of both of these is that they can feel like it's just, oh, it came out of nowhere. Like, that's how some of those can feel, especially the Triumph of the Hordes type of cards. But ultimately, for me, I fall on the side of most of the times when I've seen a Triumph of the Hordes win the game, an overwhelming Stampede in that same position probably also would have ended the game.
Yeah.
So I find Poison to be a lot more interesting. And so that's probably what I'd pick.
Okay, well, so here we are.
We are diverging?
3 questions in. We're still agreeing with each other, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I would 100% rather play against Infects, not only because, there's going to be a lot of cards that kind of do a similar thing. Again, Overwhelming Stampede would probably win in the same situations, but also more often than not, you're going to see people developing their board in a way that you have chances to interact. Like, very rarely does somebody put out a huge battlefield all of a sudden and then Triumph of the Hordes on the same turn and then win.
Right.
Usually you can see it coming a turn or two away. You have enough stages. Usually there's at least one turn cycle, I would wager in a majority of situations where somebody has a chance to board wipe. Think, oh, Joey just dropped a huge board full of creatures. We need to watch out. Yeah. Versus a lot of times, some decks just in general don't have any ways to interact with some certain types of combos. And so to me, the interaction, again, combo decks will truly be able to win out of nowhere. And maybe they have like a combo piece on the battlefield, but sometimes it's not even the case there. So more often than not, I would wager that the decks that you can see how they're winning coming from further away is what I would prefer to interact with in the wild. Therefore, I would try to stay away from combo decks. And I don't play a lot of combos in my own decks anymore, but I still play a lot of Infect because here's my board. What are you going to do about it? I think is a little easier for players to interact with, and they at least see what is going to beat them a few minutes ahead of time.
I mean, also, like, shout out to Craig Blanchett, Mr. Infect out there, but like, he plays a whole lot of Infect decks, as we all know, and we can see the tension that emerges from some of those games when he's playing just regular creatures with poison abilities. Just here's Assist Bearer, which is dealing damage to probably just one opponent in a way that doesn't help out or engage with any of the other ways that opponents are trying to end that game. And I actually feel a lot of tension about those types of things. Like, I think that's kind of interesting. It feels a lot like when your deck is dealing just commander damage and that's what you're focusing on, or when your deck is doing mill and that's what you're focusing on, but it doesn't necessarily jive or mesh with the way that other people, it doesn't build on the ways that other people might be trying to deal damage to your opponents in the same way. I think that there's some fun tension that emerges in that race with some Infect decks.
Sure.
And it does tend to be like some of those big Tainted Strike and Triumph of the Horde type of cards that do just like, here's this one Infect spell that then suddenly the damage is entirely different and one person is knocked out of the game. I think those kind of give the entire Infect or Poison mechanic a bit of a bad rap, when actually just like a dedicated Poison deck can actually be a whole lot of fun and very like tense gameplay can emerge from it.
Yeah, I mean, and plus you get to the kind of the ancillary Infect kills where it's like the proliferate type of effects where you're doing that too. Whereas combo, I feel like also we're saying combo decks, that's such a broad term.
Yeah,
it's really hard to pin down. Yeah. But I think that's also why I prefer not to play against it, because it's so hard to plan for every source of every different combo out there too, because sometimes it's an artifact deck, sometimes it's a spellslinger storm deck, and so there's some decks, like I said, you just never have ways to interact with certain types of combos, where pretty much every deck you should be planning on interacting with the creatures of your opponents in every single game, no matter what, full stop there.
Right.
And so it's harder to prepare for every single combo out there if you're playing mono white. And it kind of turns into metagaming almost if you are preparing for your friends' combo decks.
And as you said earlier too, like the combo both pieces of a combo can be played on the same turn, and then that is a different creature to the ways that other types of effects that do feel like they can come out of nowhere. Triumph of the Horde still requires that you have a board, and it's unlikely for them to, as you said, make a board and then horde in the same turn, compared to the tempo of a combo coming out of nowhere in both of its pieces appearing on the same turn.
Yeah.
I do want to say though that like I don't want to throw shade against the combos necessarily. I have a preference towards Poison and Infect, but like there are some commanders out there that I look at and I'm just like, well, I'm not going to expect an Azami Lady of Scrolls deck to win with commander damage now, am I? Because she's a 0-2. So
she could.
I mean, totally fair. If you're doing a Voltron a zombie deck out there, hit us up. That sounds awesome. We want to see that deck list. But in general, like recognizing the times that people are preparing for a combo, even if it's not obvious on the battlefield, I think those can also be fun moments of gameplay. But I understand why both of these things can sometimes rub people the wrong way. But like, there are some commanders where I'm just like, you know what? I'd rather that Brago use a combo to end the game rather than chipping me for just 2 damage here, 2 damage here, and then the game takes forever to close out.
Yeah, and a game's got to end. If somebody is comboing off and winning and on turn 10, I get that. Everybody's like more than likely had a chance to really jostle for position, try to find ways to get into a position to win, and interact with that player in some sort of meaningful fashion. Versus if somebody's comboing off on turn 3 and you're playing a social game, well, that's something all entirely. And I think that's where a majority of the field bats come, is just from misplaced combo decks in maybe a pod where that wasn't really the expectation.
Yeah. I think it's also possible that like playing combos is the type of strategy that may encourage a lot more like playing of tutors in your decks, and so then there's even more ripple effects on the dynamics of how that game may shape up, which is also worth noting.
Yep.
A lot of interesting stuff going on there. I quite enjoy it. Matt, that does move us to our next Would You Rather. Would you rather challenge the stats or challenge the stats right now?
Well, of those options, I guess challenge the stats right now? Big question mark, though.
Okay, well, I think I agree with you there, too. We are still in agreement. So we will now take a break from the Would You Rathers to challenge some of the data on EDHREC, because there's so much of it, but we don't always agree with it. So we'll take a quick break and come back with some challenges. All right, I am going to start us off this week with our listener-submitted challenge, which comes to us from Jelchinsky in our Discord, who has a very cool underplayed challenge for Sephirus of the Hidden Ways, which is the Esper dungeon deck. Jelchinsky writes, Sephirus of the Hidden Ways is one of my favorite commanders to play, and my challenge is for the card Stick Together, which, if folks don't remember, that is the 5-mana party board wipe, where you choose a party, each player chooses a party, which is the rogue, cleric, warrior, wizard, and they sacrifice the rest of their creatures. That one originally came out in the Party Time Precon, but Jelchinsky is saying that it fits really well with Sephirus, because checking the site as of right now, only 6% of the Sephirus decks out there are playing it, but Sephirus decks actually have a lot of creatures that are surprise clerics, surprise rogues, surprise warriors, surprise wizards. Sephirus is herself a wizard, and then there are a whole bunch of other types of creatures on there searching through the dungeons, White Plume Adventurers, and Rilsa Rael just being a rogue, Barrowin of Clan Undur, which is also, it just happenstance, is also a cleric. So by using this Stick Together card, you are getting a one-sided board wipe a whole lot more of the time, because your opponents are pretty unlikely to have these same types of creature types line up. I think this is such a great challenge, because Jelchinsky, you're absolutely right that your opponents are less likely to take advantage of this than you are. And not only that, but when you cast this, if Sephirus is sticking around and play, you'll get to trigger that dungeon ability too. That is just kind of awesome. I think this is really great, and I love seeing these one-sided board wipes come up in ways that you maybe wouldn't have expected initially. So yeah, only 6% of Sephirus decks are currently playing this one, and I think that number could stand to go a lot higher. Thank you so much for this challenge.
Yeah, well, I'll move on to mine then. So, one card that I think everybody knows exists is Vandal Blast. It's played in almost 300,000 decks. It's a staple. It's everywhere, folks. It's pretty simple. So it's a red sorcery, destroy target artifact you don't control, and it has an overload cost for 4 and a red to destroy each artifact you don't control. Everybody knows what this card does. I don't need to talk any more about it, but a card that does kind of pretty much the same thing that Vandal Blast does is Anzrag's Rampage, which is only seeing play. I mean, it's a brand new card from Murders at Karlov Manor, less than 2,000 decks so far, but for 5 mana, it starts off with destroy all artifacts you don't control right there. It also has more text, though, which gives it a lot of upside that Vandal Blast doesn't really have. So, Anzrag's Rampage goes on to say, after destroy all artifacts you don't control, you then exile the top X cards of your library, or X is the number of artifacts that were put into graveyards from the battlefield this turn. You may put a creature card exiled this way onto the battlefield. It gains haste and return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So, this is just Vandal Blast with upside. And one thing to keep in mind is that it counts all the artifacts that were put into graveyard this turn, not put into the graveyard this way. So it doesn't have to be just artifacts that were blown up. So if you cast this off of 5 treasures, for example, you're at least going to get the X for 5. and reveal and start digging down deep. So if you're playing a big creature deck, like maybe my Victus Asmati deck, for example, it's going to love to cheat things into play, and it's just going to have a Vandal Blast type of effect right there. I think this is fantastic. Yes, you do lose a little bit of flexibility, Vandal Blast being able to be cast for 1 to destroy a single artifact, but really, like, you want to blow up all of your opponent's things, not just one thing. So, EDHRECast Rampage, Vandal Blast with upside, I love it. I don't think this should be in 300,000 decks, but 100,000 for sure.
This does feel like, the flexibility that you get from this effect on the effect that you want feels better to me than the Vandal Blast being able to pick off a one thing. So I'm with you. I'm willing to pay the 1 extra pip to potentially get an extra creature into play off of this for just 1 turn, and then I get that creature in the hand, so I can do maybe multiple into the battlefield effects. This is such a cool card, and it's kind of one of those interesting, like, wonders of the momentum of the format, where, like, even though this is really interesting, the just relentless pace of set releases means it's probably going to be really buried. And Vandal Blast will remain. It's got that momentum behind it that will keep it super, super popular. Matt, big cosign. I really like this card. And if it, I would swap those numbers if I could, but I can't, so.
I think there's just a lot to like about EDHRECast Rampage that, I mean, everybody wants to do. So give it a look, folks.
Yeah, really, really cool card. Don't let it get buried under the relentless pace of set releases. Okay, Matt, that brings us back into our main topic here. And here's where we get a little bit fun. This one I kind of like, I wrote this little would you rather because I want to prey on you a little bit. I want to feed off of your misery for a moment. Would you rather play against Corvold, the ridiculous dragon that draws you so many cards whenever you sacrifice anything?
No.
Or would you rather play against Tergrid, your favorite?
Also no, so I would rather no.
Too darn bad. The premise of the episode, you gotta answer one of them.
Okay, so in all seriousness, these commanders are doing 2 things that a lot of players find obnoxious. And I think the question becomes, would you rather your opponents play too much, or would you rather not play enough? And that's the question that I think is kind of in the balance there, that boils down to the representatives in Corvold, which is a deck that plays too much. It does one thing and does 5 things as a result, or Tergrid that is stopping you from playing really at all. So with that kind of boiled down, I would 100% rather my opponents do too many things while I still have a chance to participate in that game versus Tergrid that just reduces all opponent interaction, really, and just being able to have a valid and meaningful impact on that game.
So, Matt, I think we finally have diverged.
Okay.
I actually feel a little bit more interested by the tension that Tergrid can produce than the obnoxiousness that Corvold can produce.
Sure.
Like, Tergrid taking all my stuff, I'm not happy about it. Tergrid ripping my hand apart and getting my stuff for free, again, I'm not happy about it. I like sacrificing my creatures, and Tergrid will then steal them from me. I'm not happy about it.
Sure.
The issue that I have with Corvold, though, is that I think it's one of those designs that looks... It looks like it could potentially be built innocently, which is just not the reality of that commander.
No, not at all, yeah.
Whereas, like, we have Tergrid's number. We know what she's about. And not only that, but the immediate effect of a Corvold hitting the battlefield is usually it hits the battlefield, it gets that trigger, sacrifice something, draw a card, it gets bigger. And then often the person will have other things like fetch lands or other treasures that will give them yet more cards, an immediate benefit right there the very second that it's on the field. Versus if you just play Tergrid and you don't have a follow-up, you don't have more mana to then cast something else that will give you the immediate effect, I've got a window there that makes me feel like, okay, I can scupper you for a moment. So that is another reason, is like the immediate benefit that these can produce is also a thing that I kind of keep in mind.
Sure. And I think there's still a window, like they're still going to get benefit for if you answer a Corvold right away. They're going to be able to pop some treasures, whatever it is. But also, like, I think that applies towards Tergrid as well. So yes, they're going to come down and maybe they don't really have a chance to do anything. But oftentimes, people are going to play the same way that they would with a Corvold deck, where they're not going to cast it on turn 5. They're going to cast it on. they're going to ramp a little bit, maybe get some mana rocks down. And if they do cast on turn 5, they're going to follow up and instantly going to get that benefit too. So I think that, yes, at its face, Corvold does more. on accident, but I also think that the people who are choosing Tergrid specifically, they know what they're doing,
right?
And they're building it in a way that they're not just going to cast it and pass the turn and then and wait. So I think that window in theory exists, but I don't think in execution it actually does, which is why the Tergrid decks are so unfun to play against, because if they ramp and get it out on turn 4, for example, and have a chance to, force people to discard, force people to sacrifice a creature, anything like that, that train just gets started all the more quickly. And I know this is like saying a lot, and this is a heavy accusation, but I don't think Tergrid is that far behind a Braids deck, honestly.
Interesting. That's very interesting to hear. I do feel differently there.
Sure.
But I again understand your frustration. Again, I'm not saying I'm happy about it. But I also I think what you've pointed out there is very, like, it's important to notice that, like, the Tergrid players, they know what they're doing. Like, they know they're not trying to fool anybody.
You don't find somebody who just, like, happened, like, oh, I opened Tergrid in a pack and I still am playing this deck after 5 games. I don't think that type of player really exists anymore, just in general with any commander, but especially with Tergrid. If you find somebody that, like, is still playing Tergrid after a game, they're doing it very intentionally.
Yeah, very much. You can't be like, oh, I'm just a little guy, don't pick on me with Tergrid.
No.
Everyone knows what you're about, including you. Whereas, like, Corvold, I think there is still room for people to try and pull that card, and I'm just like, no, I'm not buying it. And then that makes me look like I'm being a little bit unfair when I'm just like, no, I cannot let you have your commander in play, because you will draw 14 cards as soon as it arrives.
Yeah,
and that's not like, if I let you draw 14 cards, I am losing this game regardless. Mm-hmm. And it's perhaps a little bit less obvious the way that the too muchness affects a game versus the way that the I'm doing too littleness, as Tergrid produces, will affect a game. So that is why I end up kind of diverging from you here. But I just think it's funny, and I'm glad that we finally have a difference in opinion here, Matt. Good for us.
Yeah, I mean, it only took us, what, like 5-6 questions to get here, but
I know, right?
I mean, we are here. So okay, so how about the next question? Because I also think we might diverge here a little bit too.
Oh yeah.
So would you rather play against a Chulane Teller of Tales deck, which is the Bant, I'm going to sneeze and draw 7 cards, or the Voya Jaws of the Conclave, which is the new Naya colored deck, where it's Elf Ball, only it's a very deadly Elf Ball.
Yeah.
Which one would you rather play against in this scenario?
Okay, so real quick, Chulane Teller of Tales, as you said, that's the Bant, draw so many cards, 2/4 with Vigilance Human Druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card, and then you can put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, and it's got an ability to bounce your creatures back to hand so that you can replay them and retrigger that effect. Voya, Jaws of the Conclave. 5 mana Naya, 5/5 wolf with Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 3 for some reason. And whenever it attacks, you put X +1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control, and you draw a card for each wolf you control. And Matt, as you pointed out, yeah, this deck has become pretty infamous very, very quickly, because the optimized way to play it is just, oops, all elves. Just so many elves. The first attack that Voya appeared, like, with all those elves, those mana dorks, Voya is going to come down on, like, turn 3. It'll have Ward 3. People are very tough to interact with it so quickly. And on its first attack, it's probably giving your entire board a permanent +5/+5, and it draws a card. So if you just build elves, this thing takes over a game so dang quickly. And so you can probably tell from my emotion here that I am not pleased about Voya.
I mean, I'm not really pleased about either of them, if we're going to be honest. And so,
yeah.
So we're moving on from commanders. I mean, well, really, the last question in this question is commanders that put an incredible amount of pressure on the game. And from the sounds of the tone in your voice, I actually think we're going to have to agree here, Joy. So I don't look forward to playing a game against Chulane. The fact that you're casting an Elvish Visionary, drawing 2 cards, putting lands on the battlefield, putting them on the battlefield untapped, no less, so you're able to keep that ball rolling. That it's extremely powerful. It's been kind of the bane of a lot of pods for many years. But there's no protection built in. Yes, you do have blue, you have access to counter spells. But we were talking before the show, even when I realized that what Voya does, after I kind of saw it in action when we were at MagicCon Chicago a couple weeks ago, Voya having Ward 3 is absolutely ridiculous. That
just truly, yeah.
It doesn't give you, like we talked about with Corvold and Tergrid, there's a window for you to interact before they get going. Ward 3 effectively means you have to hold up board wipe mana at all times, because Voya can come down and it's extremely hard to interact with because that Ward 3 effectively takes away that window of interaction you might have with a Chulane.
Yeah, that's just it. To me, the question on these becomes a commander that produces an overwhelming amount of value versus a commander that produces a surprisingly overwhelming amount of aggro.
Yes.
And both of them are also doing kind of that Corvold thing where it's just like, well, it looks like they could be played fair. And like here's the weird thing with Voya, the fairest way to play it is by focusing on wolves. The optimized version of the deck doesn't need any wolves. Like Voya draws at least one card just on its own, and having all of the creatures getting permanently buffed, all of your elves becoming super lethal at such like Voya can end a game after 2 attacks. It's truly, truly wild. And I just think it's very interesting to like remark upon a commander that the worst part of this card is when you build it to draw extra cards. Like if you build it with wolves, you're actually making the deck not as good as it could be. And that's just fascinating to say about a commander that could draw you so many cards if you're playing so many wolves. And I just find that remarkable.
I don't think you're making it not as good as it could be, because it still is as good as it could be. Not as deadly as it could be. I think it might be my refined pushback.
Sure.
Because drawing a bunch of cards, that's what makes Chulane so powerful, is drawing so many cards. But it is interesting, and I do agree that if you build the deck to draw a bunch of cards, it's still not as deadly. And gosh, when I first read this, I thought it only put +1/+1 counters on your elves. I just misread it. Not all your creatures. And granted, I mean, you're going to play a bunch of elves anyways, but now that I've actually seen this deck in action, absolutely this thing has potential. Maybe the social aspect of the format will help keep it down a little bit, but this deck definitely has the potential to be one of the most just like, I don't want to play against your Voya deck ever again.
And that's such a shame, too, which is why I think I feel more strongly about this one, because it looks like it should be just a delightful, easy, casual, I like wolves and I like elves. These are just fun things to mash together. But unfortunately, the way that it has been designed kind of forces us to be like, well, again, I kind of can't let you. I can't let you have this in play, because then the game will end so swiftly. But also, it's hard to remove because they put Ward 3 on it. Why does it have Ward 3? I don't understand. This is not the kind of card that they should put Ward onto.
If it didn't have the Ward 3, it'd still be very powerful. But like, we just saw a Jetmir Nexus of Revels when we had New Capenna not too long ago, which is basically just a better version of that, where you play Jetmir and you win the game. You play Voya, you win the game. It's kind of silly. Like I remember I'm kind of questioning myself now, because when I first read it, I was like, oh, you only get +1 counters on your elves for each wolf you control, not just draw cards for each wolf. And so I'm disappointed in myself
for misreading it.
It should have been a card that I'm like, oh, this is what I want to do. This is not what I want to do.
Yeah, that's just it. I think that this is one that will cause a lot of what is the phrase? Like, people are excited to build it, and they're excited to just play it, and they maybe won't realize the reputation that this thing has, because they just wanted to play some dogs. You know, they just wanted to play some wolves. And
when the best elf typo commander is a wolf, that's kind of weird to me, but you know.
Yeah, there's also that. That's very funny. Yeah, this to me feels like one of the bigger sins of just like, why are they putting Ward on everything? Because like, truly, that this did not need it. Like, if you're putting it on something that costs 7 mana, okay, I think I begin to understand. But like, it was already good, and the fact that this was going to draw so much attention to itself was not justification for giving it protection.
I mean, this again, it's kind of like what Dana likes to joke about with Sheila that we saw in the Lord of the Rings set, where this is 2 good cards that are just merged into one. Like Vigilance, Trample, Ward 3. Those are fine keywords. And then the bottom half of the card, that's a very powerful ability all on its own. There was no reason to combine them into one single card.
Yeah. And like, to go to the other, option here that we could have chosen with the Chulane, like, Chulane produces a truly obnoxious amount of value. That really is. Yeah. You might lose the game before you know you've lost the game against Chulane, because like, it's just impossible to overcome that insurmountable amount of value. But I still think there are at least windows here, in a way that Voya, there's kind of only one answer. Like, either you have the Council's Judgment at the right time, and it's an elf deck, they can just replay it anyway, or you have the board wipe, and kind of everyone needs to collectively board wipe to try and do it. Both of them, I think, produce archenemy situations, but the swiftness is one that I feel a lot more strongly about here, and the difficulty of interaction. Whereas Chulane, I can imagine moments where people do collectively come against the archenemy and find those windows to deal with it. Even though I'm displeased by both of them, the new dog, I feel like it could have been truly a just benign and fun kind of design, and instead it got way too many words.
Yeah, it definitely got way too many words for sure. So, all right.
Yeah.
Next question then, Joseph. Would you rather play against decks that play mass land destruction spells like your Armageddons, your Ravages of War, or would you rather play against decks that rely on extra turn spells to crank through everything? So we're going to zoom out from commanders to strategies, and both of them do a lot of solitary, you might say.
Yeah. I don't get to play anything, or I don't get to play anything. Interesting.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna go with extra turns.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna go with extra turns. Like,
interesting.
I'm not a fan of expropriate. We've all heard I don't really like expropriate. The design on that card is truly wretched. Like, I'm going to gain control of a thing I already control. I don't like that. It's weird design. And like a lot of commanders that encourage you to play a whole bunch of extra turns, also not always my jam necessarily. The mass land destruction thing, that gets pretty tough as a conversation pretty fast. I know like a big adage that comes around with mass land destruction is like people saying, the quote responsible thing to do with mass land destruction is to play it when you're in a winning position and you can win the game immediately after it. And I think that's nice. I think that's wise, but I think it's also still missing something. And the like when someone casts an Armageddon and then another person like heroic interventions or Tef Pros out, and so then it only hits like one person gets knocked out or two people have their lands messed up. I think that Armageddon being played around produces some really lopsided states that I don't necessarily enjoy. Whereas if I encounter the occasional extra turn spell in a Planeswalker deck to get extra activations, for instance, I'm rarely upset by those. So that's kind of me thinking out loud. I realize I've been thinking out loud for a while, though. Where are you?
So I think this one comes down to the same question in principle that the Corvold versus Tergrid question was. Would you rather an opponent play too much, or would you rather not play enough? I would, again, rather have one opponent play too much compared to how much we're playing. And so I would rather have extra turns. At least they're doing something that is further, in theory at least, furthering a game state, furthering what they're doing. They're getting the benefits. They're finding ways to win the game through all those turns they're taking. Versus if you have one Armageddon after turn like 6 or so, most decks aren't equipped to come back from that. You've already spent a bunch of resources ramping. You've played out all the lands from your hand, and you're ready to go. Some decks just can't come back from that, and you really do turn into, well, you're done playing for the rest of the game now. Yeah. Have fun. Both of them do come down to one player is actively doing more, but if that chain of extra turns is ever interrupted, you have significantly a bigger window to interact with those extra turns when you have a chance to cast spells, and lands is how you do that. And so mass land destruction, removing the agency from so many players, is kind of the same reason I don't like playing against Tergrid. It removes the agency from players and them being able to participate in a meaningful way, whereas extra turns, that's one player contributing maybe too much. So I would rather play against an extra turns deck for sure than somebody casting Armageddon and maybe making it a one-sided Armageddon at that.
Yeah, like I can imagine a world where some extra turn stuff is used in what I would deem an honest way. Like time stretch, it's like, girl, you're taking up so much of the chess clock right now. Like, oh, okay. But like it is, I find it difficult to imagine a world where an Armageddon is used honestly. Is, I think, just ultimately where I come down.
As somebody who's tried many times to cast Armageddon honestly, it is not worth it. That effort is not there anymore.
Yeah, especially because like there are moments where people will like play the mass land destruction and it will backfire on them in some really wild ways. Like they think that they are playing at a time where they will secure them the win, but like it leaves room open for like, and now the game is a whole lot worse than you thought it was. Because people can respond in clever ways that are just like, no, it isn't. But I feel like one of them sucks the air out of the room in a very different way than like, all right, you get an extra turn, but sometimes an extra turn is just like playing the card Explore. You just drew a card and you played an extra land and you actually couldn't capitalize all that much off of it. So I think that's still ultimately where I come down on that. And it's interesting to see that we are reconvening on our opinions here, Matt.
But all back again.
I kind of wonder if that'll be the case for our last question here, which is, would you rather face off against Stax, famously making you sacrifice or keep tapped a whole bunch of your resources, making it, again, difficult for you to contribute to the game? Or would you rather face off against chaos decks that are using stuff like Warp World and Scrambleverse and stuff like that?
Where are you getting these questions from, Joey? Like,
my brain.
Who hurt you?
I'm trying to pay attention to what are the hot button topics that people get really emotional about.
I guess
these are things that invoke strong emotions. What are your strong emotions about them?
What are my strong emotions here? So they're attacking on two different levels. Really, it's chaos is just, it's such a time sink. It's taking forever to resolve something. Whereas and also kind of for me too, when it's the Stax deck, what kind of stacks are we talking? Are we talking like it shuts down all your ETB abilities? Are we doing like you don't get to untap very much? Or are we talking like the Braids style? And obviously not Braids because Braids is banned, but are we talking like the Dictative Erebos where like if you get something into play, it's going away very quickly? Those are two very different things. So
sure.
Now for a quality answer, because there is no winner in this situation. I think Scrambleverse type of stuff, Warp World, the Chaos decks, just because at least you're still getting to play. It's just the time equity for the rest of the table. It takes so long to resolve one of those spells that I don't know if that's really worth it in the long run. Versus Stax is just, hey, you can play, but it's not going to matter. And I think that's where it for me personally, it sucks. It's like nothing I do is going to matter because it's just going to get fixed. Like I remember Dana had a deck. He built an Athreos deck. It was the Athreos from Theros Beyond Death, where it was a Pestilence deck. All he was doing was giving his permanents Death Touch and then being able to ping everything down. So if you played a creature, he was just going to pay a single black mana, ping it dead, and along with the rest of the table. And his stuff was largely untouched because he was playing different types of protection spells where like all of the non-combat damage was prevented to him and his permanents. So he was able to effectively just lock down the board with all these Pestilence style effects. And so nobody was able to meaningfully contribute to the game. And it left me, because I remember one game specifically, I was playing Valduk Keeper of the Flame, which I have to have my commander in play for a decent amount of time to do anything.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the most unfun experiences I think I've ever played with a Stax style deck where I could play something, but it doesn't matter because it's just going to go away immediately. And thankfully Dana had we had a conversation like that was just not fun on any level. Dana took that deck apart.
Okay.
Thankfully Dana had the wherewithal to, my friends kind of were miserable that entire 45 minutes. Let's just not do that again. So thankfully,
it's generous of you to say 45 minutes. We all know it took longer than that.
It took way longer than that. Yes, you are correct. But yeah, so Stax just makes it so like you could try, but I'm not going to let you do anything. Kind of the mono blue Baral counter everything all the time to the maximum degree. So give me chaos decks over a Stax deck any day, I think.
I mean, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I am still kind of more torn on this.
Okay.
Which I didn't expect to be when writing this one down.
Really?
I truly didn't, because
that feels kind of bold coming from you. I mean, you knew the answer ahead of time.
I knew the question ahead of the time, but I'm looking at these. I'm just like, and like every 30 seconds, I'm like, no, because like, I think there are some chaos types of cards that are more egregious than others. Like, I'm not like massively like, I don't have like a strong reaction about like a Warp World. I've seen Warp Worlds that are very fun. When it's an all Warp World deck, sometimes it's kind of like, okay, like if it's an all Chaos deck, that starts to be a little bit more like, whoa, and like something like a Scrambleverse or something like, Planar Chaos, where it's just like, are these cards even going to resolve? And like, will this stick around? It's all like these coin flips and stuff that you play is never going to be the stuff that you play. The possibility storms of it all. Those also cause those feelings of like, I'm not even actually playing Magic though.
Yeah.
I'm not playing the thing that I wanted to play. And they feel so adjacent to some of those other strategies that do make me feel the strong emotions that I'm like, should I give these a pass? I don't know if I should give these a pass, because I am finding myself just not being able to do the thing that I came here to do.
Sure. Yeah.
And truly, Matt, here's the thing, is that This is going to sound so mean. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. The folks who are playing Stax, they know what's up. They know what they're doing, and they know that they're creating a puzzle for you to solve. And that can sometimes be fun to challenge against the archenemy and see if you can pick that puzzle apart.
Yeah.
Whereas the folks who are playing the Scrambleversy types of stuff, the Thieves Auction-y types of stuff that are like, everything's going in every which way and we don't know what's going to be and it's all left up to chance. They're just the most devious little trolls in their attitudes. And that's where I'm just like, those smarmy, like, wipe that grin off your face kind of thing. And I'm like, is it maybe that's the reaction I'm having here? Where I'm just like, I don't want to reward your attitude.
Not only are they giving you the puzzle that has a different art on the box than what the puzzle actually is, but there's pieces from like 3 other puzzles in there so that you're never going to be able to do it. I totally can understand it. And man, we had like the 2 most long-winded answers to this one question too, I think, because I know. I think that's how triggered we were by these questions, or this question specifically.
Maybe, yeah. Well, and especially again, because some of these chaos effects, they look like, oh, it'll be chaos and fun, but then the actual game state they produce is
miserable.
Also hard as heck to track in the rules. Not only is it miserable, but it's also like, what are the rules even?
Yeah.
What is supposed to happen here? Who controls what with the this and the that? And it slows down the game in a completely different way because we're like, judge, and like we have to get onto judge chat and a whole bunch of stuff like that. And they also will accidentally cause some stuff that I'm again not happy with in other areas, like a time sifter, for example.
Yeah.
That is by rights a chaos card that changes the turn order around based off of like high mana value off the top of the deck or whatever. But like a time sifter, it looks like chaos, but what it actually sometimes is, and you over there, you don't get a turn again for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And that's what blows.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think I'm talking myself into being a little bit more prickled by some of the chaos stuff and the trolley type of things as opposed to Stax. I'm truly not happy about either. If you just slam a Winter Orb down, I'm going to be like, yeah, what is this?
Yeah.
What's the game we're playing? But at least one of them still feels like magic.
Fair. Yeah, that's true. I think how about this? So we don't agree on the answer here, but what about we'll agree that there's a third party here that is the absolute monster, and that's people that cast a Scrambleverse on webcam games.
Oh, yes. Truly, though?
Those people can beam themselves off Eternals style right into the sun.
Okay, you know what? That actually genuinely might be the thing that pushes me over the edge and actually cements me into being like, no, the chaos is more of a problem for me because at least one of these strategies can be productively played via webcam.
I am somewhat of a debater myself.
Matt, I think you just solved it for me. That is so freaking funny.
Awesome.
Overall, though, it's interesting to see how much we agreed, but only a couple of divergences there. But I totally see where you're coming from with those divergences too. And at end of the day, some of these things truly are there's a reason that these are the hot button things and the salty whatever to talk about. So yeah. Oh man, absolutely wild.
Well, yeah. Well, what do you say then? We've answered a lot of questions. We agreed a lot more than I thought we would, but why do you say we just wrap up and maybe let the listeners too? Are there any of these questions that you think we're totally bogus on where we fall too?
Yeah, no, I do have to hear from listeners. Like if you're in our Patreon Discord, definitely the discussion. I'm so excited.
I feel like
to see this.
If there's ever been a chance to plug our patron-only Discord, this is it because I feel like the conversation around this episode specifically will not stop.
And I bet that they'll come up with even more would you rathers. Folks, let us know other things, like this versus that and what you would choose for those. Because this was fun to do, and I could see us doing maybe a part 2 in the future. I really enjoyed this a whole lot.
If listeners want to give us some more would you rathers, I would totally be down to do that again. People, you can do that too. Just send us an email, just EDHRECast@gmail.com.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, while we're here doing some outros, if our listeners want to get in touch with us, not just via email, Matt, where is it that they can find you online?
Well, you can find me on pretty much any social media platform at Mathimus55. That's MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you want some of the best accessories for your Magic cards, the best sleeves to protect your treasures, head over to Ultimate Guard. They're the best out there.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me online at Joseph M. Schultz. Most likely I'm being weird on Instagram or something like that, but I'm on all of the socials all there. And you can find the cast at EDHRECast everywhere online. And once again, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. And of course, don't forget, you can support us on patreon.com/EDHRECast as well. Our thanks go out once again to Chase for their fantastic work in the post-production of the show. You can find them online at Mana Curves. And listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.